So most of you guys probably don't remember the AM3 generation of AMD processors, or at least most of you guys probably don't know about them, or let's not say most, but let's just say some of you guys probably don't know about them. And it's because we're mostly overlooked. Nowadays, most people talk about AM4, the newer AMD architectures, and then also the very first AMD architectures as well. But AM3 and basically some of the versions before it are sort of forgotten and sort of skipped through. And when I got a bunch of parts from my school which they wanted to throw away, and when they told me that one of those parts are two exactly identical AMD Phenom 2 processors with a compatible motherboard from the AM3 architecture, I was very excited but also very concerned at the same time. Now, why is this? Well, it's because number one, I never used any processors or motherboards with the AM3 architecture. Number two, from what I've heard from other people, this architecture is really bad, really unstable, and quite inefficient with its resources. And I was on one hand excited to try this architecture out for the first time, but on the other hand I was just really sort of weirded out and I just didn't know what to do. And so after I got all of the parts, literally just a few days after that, I started work on a brand new AM3 PC build. Now, the rough plan for this build was just to add a bunch of RAM into it. The highest supported speed of the RAM I think was 1333 megahertz. It was the highest version, or DDR supported of RAM, was DDR3, and I just decided that I was going to take the most powerful kits of DDR3 RAM that I had lying around or that I just didn't use, and I would put them inside of the PC, use the low profile cooler I already had at hand, which was compatible with this processor, and then take a low profile, I guess you could call it, sort of like a mini PSU I got from a PC which I took apart a while ago, and just combine them all together to create this sort of interesting, fun, experimental little PC build. And my main plan was software-wise to just download Linux Mint on it, or just any other Linux distro which was at least somewhat lightweight, and then just experiment around with it, maybe turn it into a server or anything similar. But what I didn't expect at all was this PC taking me down a rabbit hole so, I wouldn't say massive, but so big and convoluted, yet so fun and weird and interesting, that I'm probably gonna remember this build for years, maybe even decades, to go on ahead, because this is probably one of the weirdest and most interesting first times of working with an architecture which I have never worked with, at least in my opinion. So at the beginning, everything was normal. I cleaned out all the parts that I got, organized them well, and then once I was free enough, I saw what parts I had which were the best and most compatible, put them all on the table, and once I had enough free time, got to work. I took the motherboard and I put in all of the needed components, such as 4 sticks of DDR3 1333 MHz RAM, the processor of course, the low profile cooler, which at least in my opinion looks really cool, yet also looks really cute on this motherboard and really fits this motherboard as well. And this cooler surprisingly is really good because it has this little hatch on it and this little cool little pin system which allows it to have amazing contact with the CPU even without any thermal paste or any help or anything similar. Then I put in all of the other necessary components, connected stuff like the PSU, the disk, which was a SSD that I got from one of my past PC builds which I did, and then just put it together. And then after putting it all together, I got my peripherals, I got my monitor, and connected it all into the motherboard, into the PC. I got everything on some kind of protective slash sorta non-static terrain, or I guess surface, and then I turned the PC on for the very first time. And right off the bat, I have to say the BIOS looks really bad. Like the whole graphical interface, while don't get me wrong, it does look sort of cool with the sort of old retro style, you know, interface. It just looks pretty ugly. And yes, before people start to attack me in the comments, I am fully aware that this is on very old architecture, very old CPU motherboard component, and that of course, you know, this isn't gonna have the most beautiful interface, but I just wanted to point that out for some reason. Now, I checked through the settings, I checked if everything was nicely connected, if everything was nicely detected by the BIOS and the whole system itself, and then I clicked save and exit, and instantly I had one issue. The disk itself did not want to work. What do I mean by this? Well, the disk was shown inside of the BIOS, but when it actually tried to boot from the disk, it wouldn't work at all. Like, it wouldn't want to do anything. The BIOS detected the disk, but it just didn't want to boot from it. And the disk already had Windows 11 on it, and all of this different stuff, and I already knew that this was functional and that it already had an operating system since I had already used it like a day ago on another system. And I was really confused as to why this system just didn't want to work. I tried so many different things, from swapping the connectors of the PSU, to swapping the SATA cables, to swapping the different positions of the little SATA connectors on the motherboard, like basically connecting it to the different connectors, and so on and so forth. I tried rebooting the whole system. I literally tried almost everything that came to my mind. Nope, still didn't want to work. And I was just so puzzled, yet so disappointed, and yet so sort of stressed out, I guess, because this was quite a good SSD, and I really hope that the SSD wasn't the issue, and I really hope that the SSD wasn't the one which was dead or damaged or anything similar. But literally a few days later, my teacher in my school, while we were just chit-chatting around about, you know, my new project that I was working on and stuff like that, he actually gave me a very good idea slash suggestion on how to fix the SSD, or the problem I'm having with the SSD, and what is the most likely issue. And so basically what my teacher told me is that the disk didn't work because it was used to one set of hardware and one set of drivers while it was on that first PC, and then when I switched it over to this PC, all of a sudden it couldn't detect any of the previously used to hardware and OS and drivers and similar. And so the drive got confused and then simply didn't boot, which at first, at least in my opinion, sorta made sense, but also sorta didn't. But I thought, hey, I mean, if it's like one of the last things I can do, then why not? It doesn't hurt to try. So I did just that. I made a bootable USB drive with Linux Mint on it. I picked Linux Mint because Linuxes are overall known for their awesome security and for their great lightweight structure and overall OS system. And I chose specifically Linux Mint because it's the most similar, in my opinion, to Windows, and also because it's the easiest for sort of beginner people for Linux, or for people who just want to do something very quickly in Linux and, you know, don't want to do a lot of complex things and just simply do it like they would, or similarly like they would on Windows. And so with all of that out of the way, I created the bootable USB drive, put it in, connected the disk, set the USB drive or the USB flash drive or bootable drive, whatever you want to call it, as the first bootable device, or like the first device it should boot from. And the moment of truth came. I was so scared because, well, sure, yeah, I didn't really care. I mean, I could just buy a brand new disc or like get a replacement disc. Like that's not really an issue, but my main concern was that there was something wrong with the motherboard or SATA connections or with just the other hardware itself in general. And also I was very concerned because this was one of the quickest normal SSD disc formed discs, like disc form SSDs that I had at hand, and I really didn't want this really good and really powerful SSD to now suddenly fail on me. And so after waiting for a few minutes, the moment of truth came, and yep, thank God it worked. Everything worked just fine. I managed to get throughout the entire installer and I managed to fully install Linux Mint without any issues whatsoever. Absolutely amazing. After booting into the system, the first thing I decided to check were the temperatures, which were extremely low, like 20 to 25 degrees Celsius. That is amazing, especially for a CPU like this one. After that, I decided to set up a few more settings and just customize the entire OS to my liking. And after I had literally everything, or at least most things, set up, I typed in a few Linux commands just so that I could see all of the specs of this system that I was running, or at least the exact specs of this system in greater details. And the specs should be shown on the screen right now, which, I mean, these specs aren't really anything amazing, but I mean, for a system that has, or for a PC that has parts primarily from the year 2000 and from the year 2012 and earlier, maybe a bit later, but yeah, most of these parts are from the year 2012 or earlier. These specs are great, and I mean, I couldn't really, I couldn't really expect any more from a PC like this. I was honestly flabbergasted. I mean, for such old hardware, it runs this OS really smoothly, and the temperatures are really low, especially for processors like this. And yeah, I mean, I was really surprised and amazed in a very good way how this system ran as a whole. But of course, curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to do something that was, let's just say, very unnecessary and very stupid on my part. So after all of this, after everything was working perfectly, after everything was confirmed to work perfectly and just fine, you might think that I just said, oh well, leave everything as is so that I don't break or do anything, additionally that's unnecessary, and I'll just work on it, the next day. Yeah, no. What I did after that was, I don't know what came to my mind, knowing that these processors and motherboards and the entire generation or architecture, the AM3 architecture itself, knowing that it was a very unstable architecture, and knowing that this could fail on me at almost any point, I don't know what got to me, but I decided to try and overclock this CPU to see how far I could push it. And I mean, sure, if I overclocked it just a bit, or like to halfway, maybe everything could have been alright, maybe I wasn't, gonna be doing all of this, maybe, maybe nothing bad would have happened, I would have gained extra performance and everything would have been alright and we would have lived happily ever after. But of course no. Of course I had to ruin the entire situation with my giant curiosity. And what did I do? Well, basically what I did was I just overclocked everything to the absolute maximum. Even the performance modes were set to turbo maximum. Everything, overclocking and performance wise, was set to maximum. And what happened? Well, I think at least most of you guys, or at least a big chunk of you guys, probably expected or probably know what's about to happen or what was about to happen. Literally right after I pressed on save and exit from the BIOS, the entire processor started glitching. This literally looked like architecting, or like I think it's pronounced architecting. This was basically architecting, but if it happened on a CPU, which I think is possible, although I'm not sure. But yeah, it was official. Like the processor was absolutely dead. Nothing, like there was no response. At one point I didn't even want to show any display, but then I somehow got the display to work again. And yeah, it was official. This I had messed up the CPU like really badly. Now I don't know how to fix it. I'll probably make a future follow-up video telling you guys if I managed to fix this issue or not. But yeah, I just ruined this CPU. Like it didn't take any inputs. At one point, as I already said, it didn't even take any display in it. Everything was just super buggy, super glitchy. And yeah, I had just ruined the entire processor. So future me here, this is like right after, or not right after, but like a day or two after I recorded and, you know, started editing this video that you're watching right now. And this PC has died. I didn't really manage to, I did manage to catch the moment on camera very, so you can see it. It should be shown right now. But yeah, the same, not the same, but I grabbed a totally new motherboard and CPU combo, put it in, and it just like you guys will see in this video, it worked just fine. And then after like a day or two, it just started artifacting, like doing the same stuff that it used to do, but this time with an additional issue, and that is that after like a few seconds or a few minutes of it doing that, it would just completely disconnect. It would completely turn off, and you know, the display wouldn't show anything. And I just don't know what the issue is. Like I've been losing my mind over this for like the past hour and a half, and I just don't know what is going on here. Like it's just, I'm really sorry for like the dark footage. It's because I have my the rolls down on my windows, but it's just so weird, because on one side it could be the CPU, but when you think about it, if it's the CPU, then it technically wouldn't do anything. It wouldn't be able to do anything at all. It could be the RAM, but one weird thing is that it only works with one. It only works on one slot of RAM, which is really weird. I tried different kinds of RAMs on different kinds of spots, just so many different combinations. I tried so many different things, and the only way I managed to get this PC to actually turn on and work how it's supposed to is by taking one specific stick of RAM that I have and putting it specifically on the first RAM slot. That's the only way in which I managed to normally turn this PC on and make it just normally work. And it's just, I'm just so puzzled, because if it was the RAM, then the PC would, I mean, it would turn on, but it wouldn't show anything. If it was the processor, it wouldn't be able to do anything. And so at this point, I think that the issue that I was experiencing earlier on, that I just talked about a few minutes ago with the first CPU that was quote-unquote artifacting, most likely was not the CPU, but it was most likely actually the RAM slots directly on the motherboard. So yeah, I managed to at least mostly fix the issue, and the PC was running back to normal. I checked everything else to see if everything was back to normal. Everything was back to normal, nothing was bad. I literally became scared of this CPU and this architecture, and I literally got scared of overclocking this thing, you know. I was excited at first. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna experiment with overclocking and whatever, you know. But after what I just did to their first processor, I was just absolutely horrified, and I did not even want to hear the word overclock anymore being paired with the AM3 architecture and stuff related to it. But anyhow, after this I just decided to look around the PC a bit more, check out the OS just a bit more, see if everything else works fine, and then I decided to turn off the PC and call it an end for today, because yeah, today, or at least the day that all of that happened, yeah, let's just say it was quite the interesting day for me, and I didn't really want any other issues. Truth be told, I actually couldn't fully set up this PC for now, because I don't have any connection, and because I don't have any direct or Wi-Fi connection, and the motherboard does not support LAN connection or wireless connection to other networks, which means I have to buy a USB Wi-Fi adapter or bring one from my hometown. But currently all of the USB Wi-Fi adapters that I have, well, some of them don't work, while all of the other ones are already being used in other PCs, so I have to buy a new one, and once I do, only then will I actually be able to fully set up this entire PC and fully experience its power. I didn't really experience anything bad with this system. Like, yeah, sure, at the start, these little driver issues I had with the disk, and also the mistake I did. It was a mistake, it was 100% a mistake on my part for thinking that these processors can even take on such so much overclocking, and just, you know, the overall way I treated this system during the overclocking process. So yeah, that overclocking issue I had was 100% my fault, and then the issue I had with the disk was just a small hiccup, and it didn't really do anything major to stop me from experiencing this generation of processors. And now that I've gotten at least a somewhat good look into these processors, I must say, like, they're nothing bad, or at least in my opinion, they're not as bad as other reviewers tend to make them to look like. At least so far, I've had a pretty good experience with this architecture, the so-called worst architecture by some people. Yes, I heard some people say that this is the worst architecture of like the AM lineup, and like the AMD CPUs, and I just think that's wrong. I mean, yeah, sure, maybe it's not the best architecture, and some people still rank it quite low, but I don't really think it deserves such a low spot. And so far from what I've experienced, this architecture isn't great or amazing by any means at all, but neither is it so horrible as others tend to make it seem like. If I was to overall rate this architecture out of 10, so far from what I've experienced, of course, then it definitely has to be like an 8 out of 10. Like, definitely an 8, maybe 7, let's just say 7, I guess, 7 out of 10. So yeah, definitely a good architecture, which definitely, at least in my opinion, deserves more coverage and deserves some more light to be shined upon it, compared to some other architectures which I've already tried out, and which I can say are definitely worse than this architecture right here.
Sway.